Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. I'm your host, Charles Max Wood, and we're going to be talking to Dominik Kundel. Dominik, do you just want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure, yeah. Hi everyone, my name is Dominik. I work as a developer evangelist at Twilio, and I'm based out of San Francisco.
Very cool. One ambition I had early on in my career was actually to build iOS apps. And so, of course, my solution was to start a podcast talking about how to build iOS apps. And so we asked around, we got some ideas, and eventually Josh Susser from the Ruby Rogues podcast put up the idea of the iPhreaks show, and that's what we called it. You can find it at iPhreakShow.com, and every week we're talking about iOS development and Swift and Objective-C and libraries and reactive programming and all of the things that go into making good iOS apps. I don't run the show anymore, but we've got Andrew Madsen, who puts together the curriculum for Lambda School. We've got James Zuber, who's been doing iOS development as a freelancer for a long time. We've got Mike Holt, who's a good friend of mine, who's worked in Xamarin and in Swift, and currently does a bunch of interesting work on that. And we've got other people that we're bringing in all the time to make that show better. So if you're trying to keep up on all of the advancements that Apple makes, all of the announcements from WWDC, and you want to hear from people who are doing this day in and day out and talking about it and teaching people about it and doing the work with it, then you definitely need to check out iPhreaks. You can find it at iPhreaksShow.com. That's IPHREAKS show.com. Now, it's interesting. We ran into each other at OzCon, and we've talked about Twilio and some of the telephony stuff on shows in the past, but it's been a while, and it's an interesting thing to add on to your applications if you're building stuff in JavaScript. So I thought it'd be interesting to jump on the call and have a conversation about SMS and Twilio and what's offered there. I know that there are competitors to Twilio as well, but yeah, Twilio is the one that I'm most familiar with. And I always find it interesting how the SMS message approach can kind of augment your user experience. And so I feel like it's something that's well worth talking about. I'm a little curious, though, as we get into this, has Twilio always been focused on SMS, or have they, because I seem to remember them doing a few other things as well.
So we actually started off with phone calls. Jeff Yell, Jeff Lawson, and a couple of other folks started Twilio with the ability to enabling people to integrate phone calls into their applications, because that's something that Jeff had seen in like a bunch of different startups he had founded over the time to be very difficult, because you had to work with a bunch of consultants and work with different telephone providers to actually have the ability to integrate phone calls into your own applications. And so the idea of Twilio was very much to provide any web developer the ability to integrate phone calls into their own applications using sort of the technology that they already use. And so that's why everything is very REST API based and webhook API based, so that anyone that knows how to interact with HTTP requests knows how to use Twilio. And so from there, then like a year later or something, we integrated SMS. And so with SMS, then people became more and more curious about it. I think largely because even more than phone calls, I think SMS for a lot of people seems to be like this kind of black box that people are not really familiar with, of like, how do you actually implement this yourself? And so a lot of people know us for SMS, but technically we started with phone calls. And these days we do anything that is around communication. So we have APIs that allow you to integrate chat or video into your applications. We recently acquired SendGrid at the beginning of the year for emails, and have our own IoT solution. If you want to have mobile data, you can get SIM cards from us. So anything around communication, we really provide APIs for that.
Yep. Very cool. Now, my first programming job, I was hired by a consultancy to write Ruby on Rails. And the app that I was building for the client was actually a text message app. This was, I think, a little bit before Twilio was really in the picture. So we were writing code against these, I forget what they were called. They were like some kind of phone exchange.
Yeah, API gateways, like SMS gateways, typically, yeah.
And boy, that was painful.
Yeah, that's the thing where we often come in, where a lot of developers that might have interacted with SMS gateways and stuff before found like different pain points. And so what we actually created is what we call the supernetwork on top of all of this. So we work with carriers and gateways around the world to make sure that we actually provide very reliable services. So based on the fact that we have customers around the world that use us at very high volumes, like Uber, Lyft, and Airbnb, for example, we can use all of that knowledge to kind of improve our services and work with different carriers and gateways to provide a very stable service, and then also focus heavily on making sure that the experience for developers is great.
I'm pretty sure that I've gotten notifications from Lyft, but I've also gotten notifications or text messages from Lyft too saying, your driver's here. So that's you guys, huh?
Yeah, that's us. Even though like Lyft and companies like Uber are also interesting because they use us for cases like phone number masking, for example. So if you've ever kind of interacted with your driver, for example, via a phone call or via SMS, you actually don't see their number and they don't see your number. Instead, we have a Twilio number that is kind of acting as a proxy so that you both don't see each other's numbers. And when the ride is over, you will interact with a call center instead rather than like the driver. And so you don't have to worry about, the driver being able to like track you down with your phone number afterwards.
I hadn't even thought of that. That's awesome.
So that's one of our like very common use cases these days. I wish it was more common. I'm very excited about phone number masking, and I think it's something that people do not necessarily directly think about. But kind of using a Twilio number as like an intermediary is a use case that I'm personally very excited about.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I could see that too, where you don't know enough about the person you're interacting with to know if you trust them, and so you could set something up like that and then take advantage of the system.
Yeah. And then Lyft, for example, we recently introduced something called Flex, which is our contact center solution, which is powered by React. And it's our approach of kind of taking our philosophy of like how we believe everything should be programmable and kind of configurable, basically like Lego, and take that onto a like shipping actual software. So this is the first time we're shipping software instead of just APIs. And so the contact center, the way it's built though, is it's highly customizable and flexible. So it has a bunch of different APIs that allow you to build plugins in React that let you change anything you want. So you can tap into the Redux store of the contact center and modify things there. You can tap into different actions that might happen inside your contact center, like, for example, accepting an incoming task, and as well as kind of completely change the UI by building React components that can both, again, kind of grab data out of the store, or by just, playing around. Like when we introduced Flex, I actually put sort of like a Tony Hawk Pro Skater style UI onto the contact center, just to kind of play around with what you can do. And so Lyft uses that, for example, as well to kind of integrate with Twilio. And so if you call their contact center, they're able to grab a bunch of information together and provide you a better user experience through that.
Very cool. So what are some of the gotchas then with telephony? I mean, I have my phone in my pocket all the time, and I don't necessarily want to be bothered unless I want to be bothered.
Yeah, I think that's the regulations aspect and kind of where we got in the past, or like through the past, especially with spam calls in the US. Like I come from Germany, and there I didn't really get that many spam calls, if ever. And the moment I arrived here, like I tend to not answer my phone a lot, and so we acknowledge that, and we're working, for example, with a couple of different providers on something called that we announced a few weeks ago called Verified by Twilio, which will allow companies to basically be able to, one, get verified by us to make sure that they're not, pretending like they're a certain company, but they are actually the real deal. But then also work with them on being able to specify things like the reason why they're calling without you having to answer the phone. So you will be able to see sort of your health insurance calling about a certain claim, for example, rather than, having an anonymous number ring you. And then the other thing is that from like more of a company perspective or like a developer perspective, there's a lot of different regulations around the world that you have to adhere to. So there's certain countries where you can only send SMS from specific types of numbers or only during certain business hours. I'm not sure which country it was, but like there's a country where you can only send SMS during business hours. If you like automated SMS. So if you would send them outside of the business hours, you could lose your phone number. And so we take care of a lot of those regulations for you. In fact, we just released, I think, a new website. I think it's twilio.com/guidelines or something that gives you all of these kind of guidelines of like how you have to interact with SMS and telephony in the different countries so that you kind of don't hit any red tape.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I remember when we were going through it, I think mostly what we were dealing with were carrier restrictions. They wanted us to respond a certain way to certain messages. So like if somebody put in stop, we had to respond to that.
Yeah, those are the kind of like regulations you always have to take care of. So for example, the stop one, I'm not sure if we've done it from the beginning, but we've done this for years now that's built in by us. But what we allow you to do since 2 weeks ago, I think, is to fully customize these messages so that if you don't want to have the default behavior where someone writes stop and you kind of get this generic message, you can actually modify kind of the responses that we'll send out for that so that you can modify that behavior.
Yeah, that makes sense. That sure would have been nice too. It just would have automatically unsubscribed us. We didn't have to build in all the extra features when we got a message and all that stuff. Yeah. So you do it all through a REST API. If somebody was going to go build this themselves, I mean, what would they have to do?
So if you want to include kind of anything from phone calls and stuff like that, sending an SMS is as easy as doing an HTTP post request. So you can either, if you're a node, for example, use our helper library. You can use our new Twilio CLI to do that, or you just use any library that you can use to do an HTTP post request. So this can be either in a language like JavaScript, or this can be a curl request via Bash, for example.
Right. If somebody wanted to go out and actually, they're like, well, I don't want to pay for Twilio.
Gotcha.
I want to go work, with an SMS gateway or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, what are the steps there? What does that look like?
I mean, I personally didn't go fully through all of those steps, but like one way is to kind of do the job of working with carriers to directly to interact with them and get through their kind of gateways, as well as there's sort of a couple of gateways available that you can interact with, where you then get sort of their proprietary API often to interact with. It might also mean that you will have to learn the different protocols that SMS uses. So I forgot what the abbreviation right now is, but basically SMS uses a very proprietary protocol that you would have to use to interact with this and send those SMS out.
Gotcha. Yeah, it sounds like it's easier just to figure out what the REST API looks like.
Yeah. That's sort of the idea of a lot of these, because like SMS, for example, uses a different protocol than phone calls. So if you want to interact with phone calls, you got to learn yet another protocol. I remember some folks trying to explain me the protocols, and I feel very comfortable with like HTTP and REST and stuff like that. But I was like, I'm happy I don't need to know those protocols to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give you full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open source Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io. What kind of use cases are you seeing with systems like this?
I mean, they're like the nice thing that we're always excited about is sort of we talk about two things. One is kind of contextual communications, and then the other thing is code is creative. And that's the beauty of like what we see with Twilio is there's on the one hand, the use cases that I mentioned, like Uber and Lyft for phone number masking, then like notifications, account verification. So like if you ever sign up for WhatsApp or something and you receive an SMS, to verify that that's your number. All of those kind of like very common use cases. But then we also see a lot of...
Or the two-factor authentication. I get that a lot too on SMS.
Exactly. So two-factor authentication is another example. And then we see a lot of like fun examples as well. And that's often how people interact with Twilio for the first time. So we have stories from people who, like Tan Mei, who's I think 13 now, who built a drone that he can control via text messages using IBM Watson and Twilio, and where he can like text different instructions like lift up and it like flies up, or like down to go back down.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. We actually had him fly this 2 years ago or something on our keynote stage, I think when he was like 13. And so that's one of those like fun examples. Or if you've seen recently things by Chloe Condon, for example, where she built her fake boyfriend app where she presses a button on like a flick button, which is a kind of IoT button. And what that will do is it will trigger an Azure function that will then make a call to her phone, kind of pretending it's her boyfriend, so that if she's in awkward conversations, she can get out of that by clicking that button. And so we see a lot of that kind of creativeness as well. Like my colleague Greg Bogus taught his dog to press this big red button that when he hits that, it takes a picture using a Raspberry Pi, or I think it's now using a Raspberry Pi. It used to use an Arduino, and then send that using Twilio MMS to his phone so that the dog can send selfies throughout the day, which is absolutely hilarious and adorable.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know Greg, we've talked on a number of occasions. He's been on Ruby Rogues before.
Oh, nice. Yeah. A lot of people that start with these kind of more fun and creative use cases and then come to work and the business has kind of figured out they have to do a use case with SMS and telephony, and the folks already know how to use Twilio.
Nice. So is there like an NPM package that, makes a lot of this automatic or?
And that takes most and kind of gives you an easy like HTTP wrapper and exposes all of the different functionality that it has. And then we also, if you want to kind of like explore this and you don't know exactly where to get started, we recently launched the third version of what we call Twilio Quest, which is actually a game that you can play to learn Twilio. And it's actually a game. Like you download it on our site. It's built with Electron, React, and Phaser, which is a game API. And that teaches you how to use it. And it has a built-in Node code editor so that you can actually build with JavaScript directly to learn the different APIs, and it walks you through them.
Oh, very cool. So, if I want to get started, I guess that's a good way to go. Are there just documentation that'll just walk me through how to do it?
Two best ways to get started is either to go to twilio.com/docs and kind of go through the normal documentation. That's super useful if you know exactly what kind of task you're trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. Or if you want to just learn how things work and get an idea of the different capabilities you can have, then installing Twilio Quest is a great way because it kind of combines it with a fun aspect of exploring different worlds. We even created a custom soundtrack, so it's a 16-bit style game that you can play with like a custom soundtrack and stuff.
Oh, nice. So I guess the other question I have is, let's say that I want to build an app that it lets people know via SMS that, hey, there's a new episode of JavaScript Jabber out. A lot of our listeners are not in the United States. So will that be a problem for me or?
Not necessarily. So there's two ways you can deal with that fact. One would be the fact that you can, send with a US number to any kind of country code. But the other way, if you would want to kind of, make it more personal and say, if a listener is in the UK, they should receive it from a UK number. What you can do is you can get different phone numbers in the different countries that you want to have custom numbers in, and then use a tool that we have built in called Copilot, where rather than sending from a specific number, you say, send this from this pool of different numbers. And we will do automatic geomatching so that you could even have different area codes in the US. And if you're sending to something, then you actually have an area code. It will send it from that area code. So it feels more personal.
Gotcha. Interesting. I'm also curious, let's say I had 1,000 people that signed up for this. How much would it cost me to send out a text message every week?
It depends on the country. So like every country, the cost varies because we have to make the deals. In the US right now, I think it's $0.75 cent per SMS. So let's do the quick math. So it would be $75 to send out a week to send out those. And then, with like scaling, if you like scale up, you always have the ability to go to talk to salespeople and see if you can, push the cost down based on your commitments. But that always depends on like how big your volume is. But like the nice thing is that we always start with pay as you go, so that say you decide to not send out the SMS in a week, you don't pay the $75. You only pay really per SMS of what you actually.
Right. Makes sense. Is there anything that I should have asked about that I didn't think of?
No, I think this is the best way to kind of get started. I think one common question that we tend to get is sort of, especially around two-factor authentication and SMS. And I think like we've just seen this again, as much as like there's no direct like confirmation what happened with the account of the founder of Twitter when he got hacked the other day. And so people always are like, oh, like two-factor authentication by SMS is insecure. Yes, there is SMS SIM hijacking and things like that have been used in the past to kind of get around two-factor authentication by SMS. But those are often just used for very like targeted attacks. So kind of our recommendation around two-factor authentication is we have an API called Authy that allows you to implement different ways of doing two-factor authentication. So you can either use push notifications, which is the kind of thing that we actually recommend because you know which devices you're sending these to, and you can actually send them encrypted, and you don't have to worry about, like someone intercepting them. The second level is sort of the classic, what's called a TOTP, a time-based one-time password. So that's kind of the token generator that you see with Google Authenticator and others. We provide you a way to integrate that either using our Authy app or by using sort of like a classic QR code, if that's what you prefer, even though that's a bit less secure. And then the really only as sort of the last resort, use SMS and phone calls as a two-factor authentication method, because it's still secure if you're talking about sort of the classic thing where a database has been hacked, and you have a bunch of passwords and people just run bots against the platform trying to crack the passwords. For those kind of use cases, two-factor authentication by SMS is absolutely a great solution. It's for most people in the world, it's safe. Only if you really worry because you're a high target person or something, or you're doing something like bragging about how big your Bitcoin wallet is on Twitter or something, then you should worry about sort of targeted attacks. And for that, kind of SMS is a bit more risky than time-based one-time passwords, for example.
Cool. Well, it sounds like there's a lot of really cool and interesting stuff going on at Twilio. I'm a little bit curious, and I don't know how much you know about it, but I've used SendGrid for a long time for email. How did that acquisition come about, or is that kind of in another area that you don't really?
There's actually a blog post about how the SendGrid acquisition happened. I think it's on Business Insider or something. If you Google it, I'm fairly certain you can find it. I know it involved a burrito. That's all I know that regarding the acquisition. But I know that like a lot of us were very excited because a lot of our customers on the Twilio side asked for whether we can add email capabilities. And similarly on the SendGrid side, a lot of people asked for like SMS capabilities. And so we kind of naturally already had a lot of customers that used Twilio and SendGrid, and now we can work with them on kind of improving the experience of like how to use both together. And similarly, I work on the developer relations side of things, and we've always worked with the SendGrid folks on things for quite a while. And so it's very exciting to have them now as part of the Twilio family.
Very cool. When I first started taking computer science classes in college, I thought programming was just a joke. In fact, I changed my major over to engineering and started doing computer engineering and chip design. Then I found Ruby and I fell in love. I love Ruby. It was my first real programming language where I dove deep and really learned how to make software that makes a difference for other people. Since then, and the way that we got started with devchat.tv, we started a show called Ruby Rogues. It's currently in the 400s of episodes. We've talked to hundreds of people in the Ruby community, about the Ruby programming language, about Rails, and about what makes good programming. So if you're interested in Ruby Rogues, or you just want to hear a long series of experienced programmers talking about real problems, then go check out rubyrogues.com. If there's not anything else, then let's go ahead and do some picks.
Sure.
Now, I'll go ahead and start us off with picks. Picks are just anything that makes your life better, that you enjoy. So I've been reading a book lately called Superfans by Pat Flynn. Now, I've met Pat on a number of occasions. He has a podcast called Smart Passive Income, where he talks about making money on the internet. Anyway, I've really enjoyed his show. And yeah, I met him at Podcast Movement, and he was doing a book launch. And so I got to meet him. And so I actually got him to sign the book and everything. So if you're looking at building an audience, getting to know a little bit more about the people that you're reaching out to, then it's a terrific way to go. I've also recently been reading a lot of stuff from Neil Patel. He does a lot of different things, but I've been mostly reading and studying from him the stuff on SEO, just to kind of help get the word out about the podcasts. That's just another resource. So you can find all his stuff at neilpatel.com. He has a tool on there called Uber Suggest, and it's a really, really handy tool for figuring out a lot of this stuff. So I'm going to pick that as well. Do you have some things you want to shout out about on the show?
Yeah, I think like one of the things I always try to tell people that I'm very excited about, that helped me a lot when I develop, I think it fits well in sort of the JavaScript realm here, is if you're using VS Code, you can enable a setting called javascript.implicitprojectconfig.checkjs. And what this will do is it will run every JavaScript that you write through the TypeScript compiler sort of in the background. And what that means is it catches a lot of the errors that you might be doing that you're not really thinking about. I think like a common example is sort of like document.querySelector specify something and then .inner HTML, for example, and you're trying to manipulate that, but querySelector can return null, for example. And so it's one of these things that's like very easily overlooked, and is super helpful, at least on my daily basis when I'm writing JavaScript, kind of catching these issues quickly without actually having to write TypeScript.
Nice. Before we wrap up, if people want to follow you online or see, what you're working on these days, where do they go? Where do they find that stuff?
Yeah, I think the best way to kind of follow up with like what I'm working on and stuff is following me on Twitter. So if you go to Twitter and search for Kundel, Kundel, then you can see everything I'm working on and follow me there, as well as kind of reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm always happy to help. And the same username is sort of across the internet. So if you want to check out my GitHub, it's the same Kundel, and Kundel at Twilio will get you into my inbox. So if you want to send me an email. Awesome.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this show up. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. Super excited that I was able to chat with you.
Yeah, me too. All right, folks, we will catch you all next week.
Thank you.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.